Welcome to the Phillip Wiley Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wiley.
Welcome to another episode. I'm very happy to be here today with Rubi, the CEO and founder of CYE. This is my first episode recording outside of my home studio, and especially even in another country. So very excited to have Rubi joining. One of the things that's really impressed me about people that have served in IDF and Unit 8200 is the advanced capabilities they have. In the US, people that are in cybersecurity, there's some people that went to the military, but a lot of cases is people that went to the university to learn how to defend networks or how to penetration test networks. And the thing is with corporate America, you definitely don't want to miss defending against attackers. But when you do it, usually it's not as critical as if you're in the military. You know, someone could get killed. You know, you're not only the soldiers, but the people, the citizens of their country they're protecting. So that's really critical, and to take those skills to be able to take that over to, you know, corporate organizations to help defend them and give them like that next level of protection and as far as assessments through red teaming. So that's got to be really awesome. So thanks and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Phil. It's great to be here with you, and a pleasure to record here in Israel for the first time, as you mentioned. So yes, from my point of view, you know, one thing that you mentioned is very important to understand what is the motivation, what is the objective of people that are working in the army. And you know, we see this question coming a lot: what is the difference? Why Israel is considered to be so advanced in cybersecurity? And you know, the basic reason for that is, as you mentioned, this is really a survival kind of approach that we take in the army. So you think about the technology units. You mentioned 8200. I'm coming from a similar organization called the Center of Encryption Cybersecurity in the IDF, Matzov. And that's a very interesting environment that you are in, because every attack, every kind of cybersecurity-related operation can lead to immediate consequences. Either it's a terror activity or it's something that will impact the civilian lives, whether it's a power and water kind of attacks or any kind of attempt to attack things like oil rigs that we have here now, or gas rigs that we have in the ocean or in the Mediterranean Sea here just next to us. So those are specific items that you know that if you don't protect correctly, you will have consequences.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up like the oil rigs and stuff, and that kind of translates over to some of the ICS and critical infrastructure that people are becoming aware of that needs to be protected. I mean, I believe it was last year in Florida somewhere that there was a cyber attack against a water treatment plant, and they did something to poison the water that I guess now they refer to some attack as like kind of like killware. So that's something that you've had to deal with here for quite a while.
Yeah, so that's something that you meet in the army. You know, everything that we see in the army later, we see also in the civilian world, and that's something that you know, usually we see a gap of 2 to 5 years, right? So you see something very advanced, and then later you see it in the civilian world. So I think the concept of attacking critical infrastructures in general, that's something, by the way, that we felt in Israel as well. Our power environment or power treatment environment was also attacked by Iranian attackers last year, something that was very famous in Israel. It was an attack attempt that didn't have a lot of impact, but of course, if you take it to the next level and try to understand the consequences, it's very good to have the right protections in the right places, let's say. And I mean, industrial control systems and OT environments in general, that's one of, I think, the problems that we still have in the industry that requires, you know, an upgrade in the level of security that we, as a community, invest in those places.
And so we get further in this conversation, if you could kind of share like your background, because of course we mentioned your service. So like, how many years did you spend in the military?
Yeah, so my journey was an academic journey in the IDF. That's a special program that you can have in Israel. So I was part of a program at TDM, in which I've done my B Science and M Science degree in computer science and math in Tel Aviv University, because the academic knowledge was extremely important. But then translating academic knowledge to practical knowledge, that's something that I've done in the Army. So I joined the founding team of the Israeli Red Team, Section 21 in 2005, served to 2012, meaning 7 years of service in an extremely dynamic, interesting, and diverse kind of organization in which you meet different technologies, different threats, different landscapes, really different than everything that you see in the commercial world. However, the level of sophistication, the techniques, the capabilities, the tools that you meet and develop in those kind of environments, those are priceless, right? So the knowledge, the depth of the knowledge, the problem definition and understanding of the capabilities, this is something that is extremely different. So I always say that in 1 year in the Army equals 5 years in the commercial world, because everything is in different pace. It's much more accelerated, when it comes to the offensive capabilities and the defensive capabilities that you need to use.
So I can just imagine the tools that you must have had access to that you either built, because a typical pen tester, red teamer in the US, you've got like Metasploit to use to exploit things, or you have different exploit codes out there that you could use. But I could just imagine, nation state capabilities, what you're able to do.
Yeah. So nation state capabilities in general, you can divide it to three things like everything else, right? You have the people, right? And then you have a specific training, capabilities, and skills that you are developing, also with what we like to call the Israeli chutzpah, right? That you take it to the next level. So things like social engineering and, being able to play with the person, that's something that is part of your tool set. Second, processes and procedures, efficient kind of activation, making sure you are able to cover tracks and so on, that was also extremely important. But then in the end, the tool set, that's something that a nation and all the, let's say, cybersecurity powers in the world, I would assume that they have those kind of capabilities. That's really a differentiator, that once you have this kind of tool arsenal, you can do a lot. But the point, I really think the tools are always temporary, because even if you have the most powerful tool like we've seen coming allegedly from the NSA, maybe not allegedly, what we've seen in WannaCry, the Eternal Blue vulnerability, that's something that once it's out there, you understand the power of those capabilities, and you see that the industry is not prepared to actually deal with those kind of capabilities. So we had Eternal Blue, I think 2018, right? We still see organizations suffering or being able or find it hard to protect against those vulnerabilities, although those are already 5-6 years out there, right? So it's funny, strange, and still extremely effective, right? So those kind of tools are extremely powerful, but I will say something at this point. One thing that I found is that you don't need to be, unfortunately, today, you don't need to be a nation-level player in order to cause significant damage to a lot of organizations in the industry. So, nation-level capabilities are definitely there, very hard to deal with those. But the level that we see today in the industry, I'm not saying that it's everywhere. Of course, there are organizations that made significant improvement, but still, finding sometimes it's not even vulnerabilities, misconfigurations that can lead you to compromise an organization. That's something that we still find too many times.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because a lot of times people think some of these breaches or attacks are really elaborate. Sometimes it's just opportunistic attack. You take someone with really not much skill, a script kiddie or someone curious, and they may find an open S3 bucket. Sometimes there's network shares that it's easy to get to. You don't really have to have any level of access that's not protected properly. So I think a lot of times there's a lot of misconception over what it takes sometimes, and people overlook those things and just those general hygiene things, like making sure things are proper level of access, making sure everything is secure regardless of what data you think is on there. Having all your hygiene in check is a big thing.
Right, so I'm totally with you on that one. I mean, the basic hygiene, the basic foundations of cybersecurity, access control, authentication, data protection, those are basic items. Once you have those in place, you can actually remove a significant part of your risk. It's not everything, it's not complete, but at least against different, let's say, several levels of attackers, right? When you come from the script kiddie level all the way to even sophisticated attackers, that's something that can actually remove a lot of the efforts that you need to invest in order to deal with those kind of attackers. So I always say the basics are the basics, and those need to be in place. Once you have those in place, then of course you can take it to the next level of improvement. But you cannot take it to the next level of improvement without having the foundations solid. And that's something very important to remember.
So one of the things I'm just kind of curious about too, because you think as organizations, what if you're being attacked by a nation state or some really strong cyber criminal gang? How does, you really wonder sometimes how they could hold up. I've talked to people in the past that worked with organizations that thought they could withstand a nation state attack. Is that possible for organizations to be able to withstand nation state attacks?
So that's a very good question. Let's try to just define what do we mean by sustained cybersecurity attack coming from a nation, right? Is it the initial foothold in the organization? I can tell you already, that's very hard. You don't know what you don't know. And I can tell you today that there are multiple vulnerabilities and misconfigurations that can be exploited by nations that you won't be able to identify. However, from this point of initial infection, initial access to the organization, to the business critical assets of the organization, there is still a journey. And every time that the attacker's, let's say, path or attack route becomes more complex, more complicated, longer, you have more opportunities first to identify the attack, second to block it, and of course to take the relevant countermeasures. So the point is that I really think that it will be extremely hard to try and prevent an attack coming from a nation player. We've seen SolarWinds, for example, right? How can you protect against it? I heard this question quite a lot of times, right? So you can say, hey, third-party security. Yeah, but what if it happens tomorrow in Microsoft? Do you have a protection against it, right? That's something that is extremely hard to define. However, from this point of initial infection, going all the way, step by step to your business critical assets, there you have a lot of opportunities. First, again, to detect that something is happening and, being in a situation of visibility, that's extremely important. Second, being able to react in a timely manner to reduce the consequences or the impact that you have on your organization, that's definitely possible. So to your question, can we prevent those kind of attacks completely? I would say no. Can we definitely, let's say, significantly reduce the risk, the impact to our organization? That's something that is definitely possible with the right execution. Is it easy? Definitely not, right? So we can, of course, dive into the details, what can be done and what cannot be done. And of course, it's also important to understand who is the nation behind the attack and what is their interest. Then you can really make smarter observations, whether that's possible to block or not. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that if you build your cybersecurity defense correctly, every organization is able to detect some of the activities that are being done, and definitely in some cases remove or reduce the impact to something that is definitely within the acceptable risk range.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yesterday I was speaking with one of your C2 ops personnel, and it was just really kind of interesting to hear how using cyber threat intelligence to try to reduce the risk, and if you're breached, to be able to go in and remove the threat actor, block things, but then try to go in and improve the posture where you can avoid that type of APT again.
Yeah, so in general, every time that we think about cybersecurity, we think about an ecosystem. It's not only to test your environment. It's not only to have EDR solution and security operations center that is able to detect and respond. The proactive concept, the predictive concept, that's something that is extremely important as well. So being able to go out there, identify specific threat intelligence items, either in the dark web or in other capabilities that you have. Again, if you are a nation by yourself, then you have different types of intelligence that are not only dark web related. You are able to generate intelligence, which is a very important part of cybersecurity protection strategy, right? So when you define your cybersecurity ecosystem, you need to take into consideration awareness, detection capabilities, response capabilities, preventive capabilities to prevent everything that can be prevented upfront, and of course predictive capabilities that those are more the proactive activities and exercises that you are doing, either to try and predict where an attacker is going to come from, and more than that, to find the early signs for the attack, because if you are able to block an attack in the early stages, obviously the impact will be lower. I always say that the cost and impact of an attack goes exponentially with time. The longer the attacker is there, the higher the cost is going to be. So being able to identify that early, block it early, and react accordingly to improve your posture, that's something that will be the mechanism to be able to deal with those kind of attacks. Again, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that's something that is trivial to achieve, but in the right execution, with understanding correctly the threat landscape, with understanding the threat sources and their objectives on your organization, you can definitely do a lot.
So I know with your background being, on the red team side, how important is it to have red team operations or penetration tests done in your environment to make sure that you can be as protected as you can against those type of attacks?
Yeah, so of course I'm biased, right? But from my point of view, that's one of the most effective, proactive tools that you have in your environment. From my point of view, this is the way to change this game. This game by nature is not let's say, a fair game, right? You have attackers trying to just identify with your huge posture, trying to identify where you made mistakes as the defender, right? So every mistake that you've done, 99.99% is not good enough, right? That's always what we hear in cybersecurity. So we are trying to flip the coin a little bit, and let's do the following, right? Let's try to identify the steps that the attacker is going to take. And if those steps, as I mentioned before, or the attack route is longer, you need more steps in order to get to your target. And more than that, you are able to put the obstacles in the right places, in those bottlenecks, when you know that the attacker must go through those bottlenecks. And by understanding red team operation, you understand that there are always steps that you need to take that are sometimes more risky than others. Understanding this operation can provide you with a lot of insights to how to protect correctly. So I think, and that's my statement here, you cannot protect your organization correctly without understanding the offensive side in a very accurate way. And red teaming, penetration testing, security assessments in the organization, that's the way to do that. Do that frequently or continuously will be also extremely important.
So what is the value between, because we mentioned pen test and red team operations, and some people generalize pen testing as red teaming, kind of like blue team, but like the blue team generalized. But what's the importance to doing like a true adversary emulation along with your penetration tests?
Yeah, I think that getting an understanding of how the security controls really work in time of a crisis, that's extremely important and essential. We are trying to remove all the assumptions and all the guesswork that we have, and the difference between penetration testing, which is important as well. The objective of penetration test is to identify as much vulnerabilities as possible. In the end, this is more a preventative approach, right? You're trying to identify the vulnerabilities and prevent them for the future. The concept of red teaming is more operational by nature, meaning we took all the preventative steps that you already made in your organization. We see also all your detection and response capabilities on different layers, from people level, meaning awareness, from technology space, whether it's on the endpoint, whether it's on the network, on the cloud, on the OT environment, all of those related capabilities. Response capabilities, so what happens in case you are identified, that's something that we test as well as part of the red team exercise, because let's assume that you've identified something. That's not good enough, right? You need to do something now from the point of identification to time of remediation. And testing all of those capabilities can only be done with true adversary emulation, and keep it as, let's say, authentic as possible. That will be the only way to know that what you do is really effective. Keep in mind that there are things that are very hard to emulate. So, for example, if you want to emulate a DDoS attack, again, you can do that, right? But we always try to balance between the impact that the organization will experience and the measurement of the security controls that are in place. But this kind of balance, that's exactly what a good red team is able to do, right? To give you the full experience without causing any kind of damage or significant damage to the organization within the acceptable risk ranges, as I mentioned before. But that's a huge difference between a pen test and a red team exercise in which really the entire operational process of the organization, from awareness to response and prediction capabilities, are being tested in an exercise that is should be at least as comprehensive as possible.
So just kind of getting in more to, going from IDF into starting your own business. So what does that look like? How was that path for you going from former military into the corporate world, founding a business, and what type of activities do you provide in your services?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that this kind of path is not something that you see rarely in Israel. So it's very common to see people that served in key roles in the army going after the army and trying to solve a problem that was a significant problem that they've seen in the organization. From my point of view, we've identified several problems, but I start with maybe the most significant problems that we see today in the industry, and that's how do you actually prioritize? There are multiple data items that you need to deal with. Vulnerabilities, what are the security controls that are in place? The different capabilities that threat sources are starting to gain and evolving with their capabilities. You have the budget that you need to manage. You have communication to your management to explain what specifically needs to be done, how and when. So all of those data items in the end comes to the desk of the CISO or the decision maker in the organization, and the output should be, this is the plan that we are going to have, this is the maturity that we are going to have post-plan, and this is the budget that we need in order to execute that, right? Being able to do that, from my point of view, was the biggest problem that we had, that I was first in the army, and then later that we've seen in different organizations in the commercial world. To be more precise here even, we've seen that first, understanding your risk profile as an organization was a challenge, right? There are multiple sources, cloud-based vulnerabilities, internet perimeter that we've discussed before this podcast, right? Internal vulnerabilities, Active Directory vulnerabilities, OT vulnerabilities. Now you get a lot of them. What is more important? How those specific vulnerabilities connect directly or tie directly with your business objectives. How do you make sure that when you invest in a specific cybersecurity initiative, you get the return on investment that you expect to get? All of those questions are very good questions that in the end need to be translated into a language that can be then communicated also to the decision makers. Because if you come and say, hey, I have 2 SQL injections, 4 CVEs, and I need also to reduce the risk of my domain admins in the organization, and now you go with this speech to your board, they will say, okay, but what does it mean? What is the risk to the business? Is the risk $1 million, 10 million, 100 million? What is the likelihood for that to happen? Is it something that we can ignore? Is it within the acceptable risk range? Or that's something that we need to take into consideration and reduce immediately the risk? Being able to speak in those terms, financial terms, likelihood terms, and explain it to the board, that's the essential problem that we are trying to solve. How do we do that? Is by actually executing all the relevant capabilities that I mentioned before, from proactive capabilities to predictive capabilities, identifying the weaknesses in the organization, getting the visibility into the different vulnerabilities and how those vulnerabilities connected together to allow an adversary to move from starting point to a business critical asset. Mapping that will allow you to put the obstacles in the right places. So first, visibility, then analysis, being able to translate this data structure that we've created with technical vulnerabilities to business terms, meaning this is the likelihood of those specific attack routes to happen. This is the impact in case those are happening, and this is how it's going to impact your organization, what we call in the industry cyber risk quantification. That's exactly what we are trying to do as a second step. And then based on those 2 items, technical risk profiling, business risk profiling, being able to come and say, okay, this is the optimal path now. This is what we are going to do. Doing that using machine learning capabilities and mathematical structures that are mathematically proved, right? That's the way to not only convey the message to management, but also to be very convinced yourself that you are doing the right things and the return on investment will be optimal. This is what we do in CYE in general. On top of that, of course, we offer different capabilities, from proactive capabilities to reactive capabilities. Assuming you're under stress, you have an incident in your organization, we can definitely jump in and help you to contain the situation, go back to business, and have all the relevant forensic analysis in order to make sure that these things won't happen again. We have the threat intelligence coverage that you mentioned before. So really wide range of capabilities, but in the end, the purpose is the same purpose. Let's identify the risk, assess and quantify the impact to the business, and come with the optimal plan for the organization going forward. Optimal meaning where to invest, what to invest, how much that means, and what is the risk level and appetite that the organization should have in order to balance the investment on the one hand and the risk maturity in the organization that you are trying to build.
Yeah, and I think it's really brilliant that the way you present the information in Hyver, because traditionally in the past we've had pen test reports. The only thing management might understand or the business units is the executive summary, but there's not much past that. They see these pen test reports and it's like trying to read a different language, but the way you're able to translate that into risk, assigning a dollar amount with that, and the fact even when you get more to the technical side of things, the attack graph, I think it makes it even more understandable to people that aren't technical, the CISO and maybe managers, that they're able to see this is what's possible through this graphic depiction, which I think is great, because otherwise when you see a bunch of CVEs and you explain how it's breached, they don't understand how you exploited certain things. But it seems like having that graphical display is a better way to even describe those things, is probably one of the lesser important features outside of the actual dollar amounts and the risk. I think it's a really good way to explain to those people.
So I definitely think that communication is key. I always say that. So it's not maybe the main purpose. You don't only want to communicate the solution or the, let's say, the optimal route to management and to your people that are going to actually implement it, but it's a very important tool. So it's not the only thing, but it's extremely important. So being able to speak the relevant language, to be able to convey the message in terms that are very clear, to be able to, our fellow IRA is always saying, to be able to deserve the budget you need, right? That's, from my point of view, the key element of what we were able to solve with the Hyver platform. But in the end, it's a very practical approach there. We want you to take those steps in order to improve your cybersecurity maturity and be more resilient to cybersecurity attacks, or at least to the impact of the cybersecurity attacks, right? That's exactly what we are trying to do. And I think the visual aids are extremely important. The logical part behind it, the mathematical aspect of it, the machine learning capabilities there to actually train a model that is able to predict in the best optimal way and prove mathematically that this is the optimal way for the organization moving forward. That's the brain of the platform. And that's what I'm very proud of. Right?
And it seems like one of the benefits too is having the machine learning, the mathematical algorithms that's being used, the fact that be able to replicate that every time, taking that data, not having to rely on a person to replicate this every time, that you have this platform to do that in a more timely manner and consistent basis.
And adaptive, right?
Yes.
Because data is continuously flowing through the platform. Platform is growing and data is being curated with time, with all the information that we are getting from different sources and resources that we are collecting. So that's, to me, one of the most important capabilities that you need to have in your organization in order first to understand where you are, then to convey the message, and then to really take the organization through an actual improvement cycle.
Very good. Unfortunately, we're down towards the last of the episode, but if there's anything you'd like to share before we close out this episode, please do so.
Yeah, so I think that generally speaking, moving from reactive security to proactive security, that's key, right? Being able to anticipate the different attacks, being able to understand the attackers, being able to visualize that and understand where something is going to come from, that's key. And I'm happy that we had the opportunity to meet in person in general. And thank you very much for the time. And I really enjoyed this episode. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And it's an honor to have you on. I know people are going to look forward to this episode. I always like hearing the different views, especially someone with your background is always interesting. So I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today.
Thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to The Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wylie. Until next time.